Some legends aren't born from the spotlight. They are forged by surviving it. And when it comes to Prince, the world sees the diamonds, the purple silk, the mystique. But few ever stop to ask the deeper question. Have you ever wondered why the pursuit of perfection almost cost him everything, including himself? Because Prince wasn't just performing for applause, he was performing against an enemy far more dangerous. The weight of being extraordinary in a world that tried to shrink him into something ordinary. From the moment he stepped onto a stage, he felt the eyes. Eyes that adored him, eyes that judged him, eyes that wanted to recreate him in their own image. And while most stars crumble under that heat, Prince sharpened himself within it. The public saw a man in heels and lace, bending gender, bending genres, bending expectations. But beneath that glittering armor lived someone fighting a private war, against fame, against faith, and against the reflection staring back at him in the mirror. Prince understood early what few ever dare to admit. Perfection isn't a gift. It's a burden so heavy it bends the spine. And when the world decides that you're the chosen one, you don't get to fail. You don't get to break. You don't even get to breathe unless someone is watching. He spent his childhood studying the way grown men lied, the way power disguised itself as discipline, the way love appeared only in fragments. He learned to walk on eggshells long before he ever danced across a stage. In a home divided by silence and survival, he learned a truth that every black genius learns too soon. If the world won't protect you, you better learn how to protect yourself. And that's the seed that later grew into his armor. The reason he scowled when the record labels tried to put a leash on him, the reason he recorded tirelessly, hoarding music like a dragon hoards gold, the reason he refused to let anyone else define him, his sound, his image, his soul. But perfection has a cost, and Prince paid it in isolation. You can feel it every time you watch him in old interviews, the pause before answering, the way his eyes soften and then sharpen again, like he's weighing every syllable on a scale that only he could see because he knew the danger of giving too much away. When you are a black icon in an industry built to consume you, mystery becomes your shield. Silence becomes your resistance. Most people chase fame. Prince hid from it, and yet he couldn't escape it. Because the same world he distrusted also worshipped him. They didn't just want his music, they wanted pieces of him, his vulnerability, his secrets, his spirit. And each time he stepped on stage, he felt the tug, the world begging him to bleed a little more for them. Imagine this, being adored so deeply that the love starts to feel like a cage, being praised so loudly that you can't hear your own doubts anymore. And every time you look in the mirror, you see not yourself, but the version the world expects you to be. Prince saw that a reflection every day, perfect, flawless, untouchable. But behind it lived a man terrified of being ordinary, terrified of disappointing the people who believed he was made of something divine, and that fear pushed him further. Into nights without sleep, into battles with labels, into spiritual awakenings and creative obsessions, into a constant search for purity, in his music, in his beliefs, in the way he carried himself. He needed control the way others need air, because when your life has been defined by chaos, control feels like salvation. But salvation comes with a shadow, and the shadow behind Prince was loneliness. He trusted almost no one, loved only in fragments, opened up only in moments so rare they feel mythical now. He lived in a world of sound, but slept in silence. And though millions screamed his name, very few ever got close enough to know the man under the purple. Yet you can't blame him, can you? If you had his gift, if you felt the world pulling at you from every direction, wouldn't you hide your softest places too? Prince wasn't running from fame. He was running from becoming the thing fame wanted him to be: predictable, profitable, and replaceable. He knew better than anyone that black brilliance has always been the world's favorite commodity, celebrated publicly, controlled privately, and discarded once it stops producing. And so he fought, not with fists or anger, but with boundaries sharper than any blade, with creativity that refused to be tamed, with a sense of self so powerful that even the biggest gatekeepers couldn't rewrite him. But every war, even a righteous one, leaves scars, and Prince carried those scars long after the applause stopped. Some legends rise because the world lifts them, but others, like Prince, rise because they refuse to kneel. And the deeper he traveled into music, the more the industry tried to mold him into something smaller, something safer, something marketable. Yet he moved through those pressures like smoke through fingers, untouchable, elusive, untamed. To understand his fight, you must understand the arena he walked into. The music industry has always had a quiet rule. If a black artist becomes too powerful, too intelligent, too free, the system must find a way to own them. And Prince saw that trap before it snapped shut. He watched the way contracts became cages, watched artists sign away their names, their masters, their identities. Watched labels pretend to offer freedom while fastening invisible chains. Most performers step into fame hoping to be embraced. Prince stepped in knowing he would need to rebel. He studied the system the way warriors study their opponents, tracking every move, every lie, every smile that didn't reach the eyes. By the time the world realized he was a prodigy, he had already realized they were predators, so he built a fortress around his genius. Every note, every riff, every whisper recorded on his own terms. He created like a man racing against something, against time, against the industry, against the fear that if he ever stopped, the world might catch him and reshape him. But perfection is both a sanctuary and a prison, and Prince lived in both at once. He demanded mastery not only from himself but from the universe around him. The band, the sound engineers, the lighting, the air in the room. Everything had to align. Everything had to vibrate at the same transcendent frequency. And when life refused to meet that standard, and life always refuses, he felt the fracture. You know that feeling, don't you? When you hold yourself to impossible expectations, not because you want to, but because you're terrified of what will happen if your flaws show when you polish every surface of yourself, hoping no one notices the cracks beneath. When people praise your strength but have no idea how heavy it is to carry. That was Prince, a man the world called fearless, even as he quietly drowned in the weight of his own perfection. But the world only saw the shine, the lace, the heels, the eyes lined in daring, defiant black. He became an icon of gender fluidity long before the culture had language to properly name it. He wasn't trying to shock anyone. He was trying to free himself from the boxes forced upon him. And what does a man do when society denies him the space to exist fully? He carves that space with a blade of his own making. Prince's blade was beauty, and beauty, when used as rebellion, cuts deeper than violence. Still, every rebellion invites consequences. Behind closed doors, he battled the industry that tried to claim him. He became the artist formerly known as himself, not as a gimmick, but as a declaration. You cannot own me. Even changing his name wasn't madness. It was strategy, a spiritual, political, creative uprising disguised as a symbol. A refusal to let the corporate world rewrite the very essence of his being. The public laughed. The insiders panicked. Prince simply watched, unbothered, as the world misunderstood him for the 1,000th time. He wasn't fighting fame, he was fighting the price of fame, the way it twists identity, devours authenticity, and demands obedience. But even as he pushed back against the world, another battle stirred within him, a more private, more painful battle. The war between the artist he was and the man he wanted to be. Because mastery is intoxicating, applause is addictive, perfection is seductive. And Prince was caught between two forces, the divine drive to create endlessly and the human need for rest, connection, and peace. Yet peace felt like a stranger. Faith became a refuge, then a question, then a compass leading him towards something he couldn't fully name. He searched scripture the way he searched melodies, looking for patterns, for truth, for order in the chaos. But the more he reached for spiritual purity, the more his fame conflicted with it. How do you seek humility when the world treats you like a deity? How do you pursue holiness when millions demand your sensuality? How do you quiet your soul when every room explodes the moment you walk in? Prince lived in that contradiction every day, torn between the sacred and the profane, between the stage and the sanctuary, between the legend the world demanded and the soul he hoped to save. And the more he tried to balance those two realities, the more the cost became undeniable. There comes a moment in every legend's life when the lights feel less like celebration and more like interrogation. For Prince, that moment stretched across years. Years when brilliance began to feel like burden, when applause thundered too loud for a man longing for silence, when the reflection staring back at him no longer mirrored the truth he was fighting to protect. Perfection had been his shield, his weapon, his sanctuary. But perfection also isolates, and Prince understood the loneliness of excellence more deeply than most. The industry celebrated his genius, yet never stopped trying to consume it. And while fans saw a man reinventing himself, shifting identities like constellations across the night sky, the deeper truth was quieter and far more painful. Every transformation was the price he paid to survive a system built to break him. The world looked at Prince and saw mystery. They saw glamour. They saw a man bending gender, sound, and expectation until none of the old rules mattered. But beneath the velvet and the vibrato, he existed as something far more fragile, a man trapped between the myth he created and the humanity he couldn't escape. You've felt a version of that, haven't you? When the world asks you to perform a role long after your soul has outgrown it, when your own achievements begin to imprison you, when you can't step outside the version of yourself people have decided you must be. Prince lived in that cage long before the public ever noticed the bars. He carried a brilliance that demanded discipline. Hours spent in the studio until night bled into morning. Hundreds of unreleased songs stacked like confessions he wasn't ready to share. He created so obsessively that some mistook it for mania, but it was survival, because the moment he stopped creating, he would have to confront the one thing he feared more than failure, the emptiness fame left behind, and that emptiness grew louder as the years passed. Those close to him spoke of a man who oscillated between spiritual devotion and artistic obsession, between ascetic purity and sensual expression. He was a paradox walking, a soul stretched between heaven and earth, and the more he wrestled with faith, the more the industry clashed with him. A man seeking divine clarity cannot thrive under a system built on excess. The conflict became internal, tectonic, two worlds grinding against each other inside one body. His faith encouraged surrender. His art demanded control. His fame required performance. His soul pleaded for rest. Imagine carrying that. Imagine standing on a stage being adored by millions while silently begging for the strength to forgive yourself for being human. Imagine trying to live a spiritual life when the world refuses to see you beyond the sensual energy they project onto you. That is the price of perfection. When success becomes a gilded cage, when applause becomes pressure, and when every reflection reminds you not of who you are, but who you're expected to be. And yet, even in that internal storm, Prince continued to fight for autonomy. He fought for artists' rights long before it became fashionable. He refused to sell his masters, refused to bow to labels, refused to let anyone script the narrative of his life. He declared war on an empire that believed it owned him, and he did it without raising his voice, only raising his standard. The purple symbol etched into history wasn't just a name. It was a declaration that identity is sacred, that no corporation deserves to own a human soul, that Black artists have the right to define themselves without apology. But the deeper tragedy was this. Even while liberating the industry, he could not fully liberate himself from the battlefield inside his own heart. By the time the world realized the toll it had taken, it was too late. His physical body carried the burden of years spent refusing rest, refusing weakness, refusing imperfection. Pain, exhaustion, and coping mechanisms crept in where peace should have been. But even in his final years, there was still fire, still that spark that refused to die, and that's what makes his story both beautiful and devastating. He was a man who demanded transcendence in everything except the one place that mattered most, his own suffering. Some say he should have slowed down. Others say he couldn't, but the truth lies in what he represented: a soul too expansive for the limits of flesh, a mind too brilliant for the pace of ordinary life, and a heart too conflicted to ever stop searching. Prince spent his life fighting the world, fighting expectations, fighting the systems that tried to cage him. But the greatest battle, the one no one truly understood, was the battle against himself. In the end, when the lights dimmed and the stage fell quiet, The world was left to confront a truth it had long ignored. Prince was not just a symbol of genius, rebellion, and sensual magnetism. He was a man shaped by contradictions, each one carved from the pressures of race, purity, artistry, and survival. And if you listen closely, you can still feel those contradictions humming beneath the legacy he left behind. The mythology surrounding him often paints a portrait of a supernatural being, someone untouched by the vulnerabilities that haunt ordinary lives. But the real story, the one the industry preferred to silence, is that Prince's perfection was not effortless. It was engineered, disciplined, and built from wounds that rarely healed. While the world consumed his brilliance, few considered the emotional toll of being expected to embody excellence every single day. Some legends are born into the storm, others are forged by it. Prince lived inside one. He was a black artist navigating a world that demanded spectacle while refusing to honor the complexity of his identity, a world where genius is celebrated only if it can be controlled, and where the price of freedom is often paid in isolation. Prince's insistence on autonomy wasn't arrogance. It was resistance. It was a refusal to let the industry devour him the way it had devoured so many before him. And yet, that same perfectionism, the force that protected him, also became the force that trapped him. You know what that feels like, don't you? When excellence becomes armor and prison. When the world applauds your strength but never notices the fracture lines beneath it. When everyone assumes your talent makes you immune to pain. Prince lived with that illusion every day, even as it quietly unraveled him. He sought refuge in spirituality, searching for clarity in scripture, prayer, and purpose. But faith is complicated when you've built an empire on seduction and spectacle. The contradictions pulled at him, reshaped him, and sometimes tore him apart. His devotion to God didn't cancel the art that came from desire, longing, or rebellion. It simply reminded him how impossible it was to be both holy and legendary in a world hungry for his imperfections. Inside studios, he was unstoppable. But inside his own body, the war raged on. Injuries, fatigue, and years of performing with superhuman intensity had consequences he never wanted to admit. The painkillers that entered his life weren't symbols of weakness. They were symbols of sacrifice. The price his flesh paid for the ecstasy he gave the world. But even then, even as the shadows lengthened, he did not stop fighting. Prince worked, created, and reinvented until his final days. As if he knew what loomed ahead, as if stopping would force him to face truths too heavy to confront. The loneliness of genius, the fragility of mortality, and the reflections he had spent years avoiding. The industry mourned him, but it also benefited from the silence surrounding his struggles. Genius is easier to market than suffering. Perfection sells better than humanity, and Prince, by choice and by necessity, had always been the perfect enigma. Yet the deeper magic of his legacy is this. Even in death, he continues to challenge the systems that tried to claim him. His vault of unreleased music stands as a monument to his refusal to let any corporation dictate his art. His battle for ownership sparked a generation of artists to demand the rights he fought for alone, and his insistence on creative freedom became a roadmap for those who came after, especially black musicians navigating an industry built on extraction. Prince's story isn't a tragedy, it's a warning and a triumph. A warning about the cost of deifying human beings. A warning about the cruelty of an industry that applauds until its icons collapse. And a warning about the invisible wars that brilliance often hides. But it's also a triumph of identity, autonomy, and spiritual resilience. Prince proved that legacy isn't measured by chart positions or awards. It's measured by the courage to live as your truest self in a world that prefers illusions. The price of perfection was steep. It took his sleep. It took his peace. It took pieces of his soul the world never realized were missing. But what it never took, what it could never take, was his truth. Because truth is the one thing perfection cannot erase. Truth is the shadow that outlives fame. Truth is the heartbeat that continues long after the music stops. Prince fought fame. He wrestled faith. He challenged his own reflection. And in doing so, he left behind a legacy that is larger, deeper, and more human than the myth the world tried to build around him. Perfection may have cost him dearly, but identity, real, unshakable identity, was the victory he carved into history. Legends may fall, but their truth always rises.